Oh, I've wanted to do this one for a long time. I get to ask the questions. Thank you so much for doing this. Let me take out some of the notes we had. This will be the session of limerence. Ready? We're almost there. Okay, a question. I want to ask you first, what's the biggest misconception about your role as journalist? These are three people who have kept me and so many others in our industry informed, up to date, found out what's going on. It's a delight to be here. So what do we think about you that's wrong? What about your work is different than we might expect? I know that some of you were, how do we say, kvetching about the response to some of your columns and work like that. Who's going first?
You want to take that?
Okay, well, I'd say the biggest misconception is that we're smart. I think primarily what we do is listen to people and parrot it back in some form. The second misconception I would say is that, we have an emotional bias towards things. Generally, we're dealing with the information we have at the moment, just like you guys are when you're analyzing or researching a market.
Didn't you say that you got some call every time you do an article or something that people expect it to be featured as a full page, but?
Yeah, I think a lot of misconceptions I think now stem from the fact that the business of journalism has changed so profoundly, and I think the most easiest way to think about that is all the people who still expect to be covered in the print edition of the New York Times, even though the vast majority of our readership is now online or in other electronic forms. There still is a belief that the print edition, to some people, is the be-all and the end-all, and I think that misconception about what goes where and how, I think is something that really still drives a lot of the confusion and distrust between journalists and the people who they write about.
You mean I gave you this 20-minute story and you put it in the .com version? It wasn't on the the printed page? That must happen quite a lot.
Yeah, although that's starting to change, obviously, and you can generalize and say that the younger people are, the less likely they are to expect it to be in the print edition. But I'm overgeneralizing there. But I think that is something that's really changed quite a bit in just a short time. But it still continues to be something that comes up a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. We still get calls for people wondering where the print edition is of Television Week, and we haven't had a print edition since 2009. It's very interesting what Joe's comment about bias. I think people have a lot of people have a fundamental misconception on that point and don't quite understand why we're not cheerleaders for the information that we get, or if we're doing a story on a certain person, why aren't we really cheering for that person? That's really not our function. The best way to think of us, and even though we maybe reach different constituencies, obviously Stuart has the broadest constituency with a huge consumer base, and he can talk about that, as well as obviously the business people that read you, we look at things from a reader point of view. And so that's what you have to think about when you're talking to a journalist, maybe what their readers are interested in, and given who their audience is targeted towards.
Oh, so you're really not supposed to criticize, you're really only supposed to say positive things about things.
Yeah, a lot of times people say to me, well, you've been in this industry a long time, and I have to interrupt and say, no, I'm in the journalism industry. You're in the advertising industry. We're not in the exact same industry, because years before I covered advertising, I covered other subjects. So I think that's a misconception too, that somehow that we're attached in some way to the industries that we cover and that we report on, that we're part of them, and then that gets translated into that cheerleading, rah-rah kind of aspect where a lot of people expect you to be their secretaries, writing down what they want and putting it out the way they wanted it.
Right. And I think another thing that happens, and it certainly has happened to me in the past, I remember years ago, I was doing a story about Turner and the Upfront, And Steve Heyer was there at the time. And it was sort of what happened with Fox during this upfront. A lot of people were upset with Turner at the time. They felt that they went to the marketplace and didn't ask for the maximum CPM increase that they thought they could have leading the market. And I wrote the story, and as I was writing it, I called the people over at Turner at the time and asked them to comment, and they chose not to comment, and had a lot of people on the record commenting why they were mad at Turner. And Steve Heyer called me the moment the story appeared and was just furious that it didn't have their point of view that, of course, he had refused to talk about. So I think it might be that's obviously a strategy, and some of your people might be advised that by your communications folks. Don't talk to the journalists. I've always felt, if a journalist is willing to talk to you and get your viewpoint out there, talk to them.
Yeah, along the lines with that, I like to use the expression that journalism is the best first draft of history. I mean, we only can write about what we know at that moment, and we're under pressure with deadline and talking to sources. But certainly at MediaPost, we don't just write a story once. We try and follow it and write the iterations. And by the way, sometimes we get it wrong. And we have a process for clarifying and correcting that. We'll rewrite about it. We'll say when we got something wrong. It's not an exact science.
How do you go about the business today? How's it changed?
Yeah, so my view is, playing off of your opening remarks about the speed and change, it is overwhelming. I mean, Stuart pointed it out with the perception about the print edition versus the digital edition, which is kind of a whole separate conversation I'd like to have. But I look at life in general and our business in particular as a concept of triage. That you can only deal with the most needy cases first, and then everything else gets left behind. Because by the time you've fully assimilated that piece of information, some new information's coming behind it.
You're all doing daily
reports. The pace of how things move now is just unbelievably faster than it was just a few years ago. It just really, it's exciting, but it's also terrifying at the same time. It's like being on some really, really new, very expensive roller coaster at some theme park that has all the greatest new features in it, but at the same time, hang on and fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be a very bumpy ride.
But that's not the expectations, right? I'm calling you up and I want you to pay attention to me, and I've got a big story and I've got the story. I mean, yeah. That's not what it is.
And by the way, there's another dilemma that's going on, which is there were many, many information markets going on simultaneously. In the old days, the New York Times was the gospel, and then the trades were probably secondary. But today, you have many different sources for information, including yourselves. I mean, how many people in this audience tweet or post industry news developments on social media right now? Probably a lot. We're competing with all that. A lot of you are bloggers, too. We're competing with that. And by the time, sometimes we get broken on news, or we get beat on news that breaks when people tweet it before we even get to it. Now, I think in that sea of noise and just a ton of information, things like the New York Times stand out even more. They become more important because you're trying to filter and process what the context of all those things mean. And to David Brooks' point, you default to that objective measure and what you know to be valuable. So hopefully within that TV Week and MediaPost become more valuable too, but there's a lot of noise out there.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this huge change that journalism has undergone, and the speed, especially that Stuart mentioned and that Joe emphasized, is actually the only reason we still exist. The motto of Television Week, which will be 30 years old next year, is actually started as electronic media, which at the time was the Bible of the syndication business, as you guys know. And the syndication business went from there to here. Okay.
I was going to say, what's the syndication?
Yeah, exactly. So as when I came aboard, tried to broaden out what we did, the problem is we became the second or third or fourth advertising vehicle. And we were advertiser-driven. Subscriptions, obviously, paid subscriptions were going down and down, and all of us started giving away our content more or less for free, especially on the internet. So the business model that we've figured out is basically an aggregate model. So the moment that Stuart posts something, we can post it. The moment you post something, we get it out there. So we're the one-stop, and we have enough readers that we have enough advertising now to continue that model with a much reduced staff. So we're actually here because of these changes that we're able to adopt to. But it's tough, and it was tough for us to finally figure out, how to go about a way to keep us going. So.
We can sort of call this panel, you know, men of a certain age. Talk about Turner. Part 2. Is it so different than when you started? I mean, what you learned. I mean, how you operate.
I can't begin to tell you how completely different everything is now from top to bottom. I mean, you all know in what you do and how you do things and how you get your information and just your day-to-day routine now is just completely changed. Right now, at the Times, we're all basically on deadline all the time because if in the old days you would write maybe an article for the next day's paper, and maybe if you had a lot on your plate, you would write 2 articles for the next day's paper. Now you're just constantly and continuously writing for nytimes.com, for the various blogs that appear on our website, for different specialized newsletters, and then, yes, also the paper. So you can have, during the course of a day now, 3 deadlines, 6 deadlines, 9 deadlines. And at the same time, you're still trying to do your job in the same way that you did a long time ago when you only had 1 deadline. And clearly, the ability to juggle balls in the air, multiple balls in the air, is something that, for those of you who remember the Ed Sullivan Show, where they used to have that guy come out in between the Beatles and Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet and do the juggling act, it's fun to watch, but you wouldn't want to do it for hours on end. And I think that's what our lives in a lot of cases are these days, just a continuous juggling act, and just keep hoping that the balls just stay up in the air.
Easy for me, difficult for you then, I understand.
It's all right.
It's all right. All right, now you've complained and you confessed how difficult work is, though it's exciting and challenging. Now let's give us a couple of scoops. What are some of, let's talk about media/research/advertising. Okay, what are some of the most important issues based on the distillation of what you've collected and heard? What are some of the big issues right now? What are you hearing?
So my own personal view is that we've shifted from primary research to more analytics of real-time data, and in a lot of cases, I'm talking about media research issues.
Okay.
Not necessarily the best data, but available data. So, and I don't mean to slam anybody's business models here, but you know, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of momentum behind social media, listening posts and tracking and modeling. And that's still only a small subset of what people are actually doing and talking about out there. But I believe the momentum of the internet and social media have kind of moved the industry in that direction. So I think the shift from primary research to analytics has been a big factor. I think in general, you know, digital media is kind of driving the train right now. I think it's interesting what Stuart said earlier about this allocation mentality around the print edition of the New York Times. I mean, we actually have that at MediaPost in a very small scale. We still print some magazines. And people, PR people and communications people always want to be in our print editions. And I'm like, why? We reach much fewer people than we do with our digital. I mean, on digital, you know, with a Google index, we could reach, you know, hundreds of thousands of people. With print, we reach about 30,000. But I still think people see that as being important. And I think another big shift is that as there's more and more noise and confusion out there, these little allocations become much more important to people in a way. So you really want to stand out and be different.
Well, a couple of things I want to say. First, about the print edition is interesting. I got a call the other day from someone working at Fox saying that Fox News saying that Roger Ailes wanted something we published years ago in the print edition. And I said, well, we've done, you know, similar. No, it's got to be in the print because Roger wants to like put it up. So there's, you know, that kind of factor that, you know, the old school people want to still do that. I think a couple things off of what Joe said. I think one of the difficult things for you guys is just there's just so much more information, and to distill that and the analytics and what works and what doesn't work. I mean, what's so interesting about listening to David Brooks, from my mind, is I'm thinking to myself as an editor and as a writer, you know, how would I distill that and maybe write that up as an article. And what was so fascinating about that is he mentioned so many nuggets, so many fascinating things. That's a series of stories. That's a PBS series, that speech that he gave. That's not one show, because it all gets lost, especially in today's, where we have just, it's click, 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 click. And he just had so much information. It's the guessers, it's the askers, it's the mother bonding, it's all this stuff. It's too much information. If you really want an impactful article, you take one of those things. And David knows that as a communicator when he writes his articles. He really tries to laser maybe on one thing, especially this political stuff. But
tell me more about issues that you're hearing that you think in the television area.
What's interesting is we've long defined television as the video on multiple screens, and obviously that's what's happening. People are really going out and watching television in all places. So mobile is going to become really, I think, more important as we go forward. And of course, the question that you guys have to figure out is the analytics, as Joe mentioned, and figure out what's real and what's not real as you analyze all these things. I mean, that's the difficulty is, what's really going to resonate with your clients. And what's really true and real, and that's difficult.
You're in a broader area. What are some of the key things?
I think some of the things that we're interested in right now, or that seem to be higher up on the list of things to follow, is the whole issue of targeting, advertising targeting, for good or for bad. The idea being that people don't like advertising because it's not relevant to them. And if you make the ads relevant, you will get them to be more interested in them, less complaining about them, and obviously it would be both more efficient and economical for the advertisers. And some of the new technologies that enable targeting across all different media to work is a fascinating story. And then the flip side of that is the issues that are brought that come up as a result of targeting when people feel that it starts to invade their privacy. And the whole issue of the pushback on advertising targeting, I think, is something that is, I wouldn't say of endless interest, but is certainly broadly interesting, and I think is something that we and everybody up here on the stage are going to keep an eye on for quite some time to come.
Well, that's good. This is very helpful. Let's go the other way. Could you think about a topic that you think is really underreported? I mean, what's being overlooked, or maybe it deserves a greater place at the table for your attention?
I don't know. It's hard to say now what, if anything, is overlooked, because there's just so many different sources of information, and you've got the broad sources, the targeted sources, you've got the trade publications, you've got the general media like ourselves, and then you have all the self-published folks like everybody out here in the audience who is a blogger or tweets or posts on Facebook, which is people are reporting on news. As Joe said, there was a situation not long ago where at an ad agency, they called a general meeting of the entire agency to tell them about a major new advertising account the agency had won, and a half a dozen junior staff members in that meeting tweeted the news out and therefore became reporters on their own. We were going to go run down there and give them little badges, junior reporter badges, like the wings that the pilots used to give out on the airlines to the young passengers. But in that case, it actually almost cost the agency that account, because the new client was not willing to had his own timetable on announcing that news, and the meeting at which the agency was being told that they won the account was not the client's time to announce that. But when the tweets went out, that was that was an announcement. So people got really upset about that.
Is Ashton Kutcher still talking to you, by the way?
I think that you bring up a very interesting point, Stuart, and to what Joe said earlier. I think because of the way communication is today, we're all reporters. Everyone's getting that information out. Is the dangers, and the nature of our business has always been such where I think reporters are looking for the newest thing. They want to break the newest story. They want to get, whatever is out there is the newest thing. So the danger, I think, is more the fundamentals of making sure you focus on fundamentals, and that might be the story that doesn't get reported as much because it's not the new story.
Is there one that do you feel there's a subject in this field that's not being reported on enough, not getting enough attention?
These days, it's like Stuart said, it's almost, you'd have to almost say, David, is it not getting enough attention because Stuart's not writing it? Is it not getting enough attention because Joe, who's almost the guru of reporters on measurement and technical things of that nature, because he's not writing it, or his staff? I mean, I don't really know if that's...
What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. My perspective is context, because one of the things I learned when I came to MediaPost, it's something I really always kind of knew, was how fragmented our business really is, how fragmented our world is, and yet we've clustered around a few big ideas that dominated our industry, like the upfront, television, things like that. But when I came to MediaPost, I saw how much of the industry was really kind of micro markets and long tails, people practicing in forms of marketing services I didn't even know really existed. Now today they're really important and big, like even things like email marketing and behavioral targeting and search, and it continues to grow. I mean, here's an interesting statistic. When I was at Ad Age, I used to do this analysis where I take the Ad Age agency rankings for the big holding companies, yes, and I'd analyze it by the media billings data. And if you look at it, the 6 agency holding companies only represent about less than half of total media spending in the world or the US. So I understood that the business was always a fragmented market and a lot of long tail agencies. But that's just looking at advertising. There's all these other below the line marketing services that were actually an important part of the marketing mix. Ironically, they're becoming important again today with social media. Things that I would have called PR years ago are becoming very important in marketing organizations. I'm only saying this because I realize at MediaPost we don't cover one subject. It's not like we cover online media or traditional media or marketing. We're covering an array of little silos, and I don't even cover all of them. It's some of my reporters who are doing it. But looking across all these things, I realize how fragmented our industry really is. But it's really important that we come together at some point and understand what the context of all those things mean. And I think that's very, very hard.
I want to ask you another question. Here's how I want to formulate it. When we talked about this a few weeks ago, the subject is research in our community, the community out here. What do non-research executives tell you about research? Is there sort of a theme? When you talk about, you're speaking to someone who runs a sales department or perhaps a marketer, what do they think about research today?
I'll jump in on that.
You take the risk.
I don't think it's just today. I think it's forever. I mean, I believe in our industry there's theoretical research, which is the gospel, what people are really doing based on, primary research and analytics of it. And then I think there's applied research, which is what do we do with the data? Because whether it's something like programming or designing media, you need to, apply the research, and you have to make, like David Brooks said, some judgment calls around that and go with it. But there's also spin. So if you're selling a medium, right? And I don't want to name any names here, but there's some great respected researchers who talk one way to us when they're talking about the sanctity of the primary research, but then I hear them spin an entirely different story when it comes to the marketplace and how they're performing. And I don't necessarily think that's bad, but I think it's a reality of the way people use research. So the problem with that is if you get way down the line to sales reps and people who don't even understand the real underlying elements of that research, and then you go to reporters who are picking up on what they're saying, you could come up with a lot of confusion. When I started out covering this business, it was very common for us to have a little boilerplate at the end of the, margin of error, things like that. We don't do that anymore.
What do you think?
David, I want to answer that question by an example. I came into town yesterday afternoon, and I'm staying at the Sheraton, and I always check out what's at the Ziegfeld. I'm a movie buff. I love movies, and they're showing Super 8. So I ran over there. It's a movie I wanted to see. I'm a big J.J. Abrams fan, Spielberg. I like the idea, et cetera. So I run over there, afternoon show, and I said, how much is it? $43. Why so much? It's not 3D. No, it wasn't that much. It was $13. So I get my ticket, and with my ticket comes this, which is very interesting. You can't see it. I'll read it to you. He gave me this. It says, Clearview Cinemas, Summer Escape 2001, everyone is a winner. Grand prize, a season pass, good for 1 year. I don't get to New York that often. I could give it to Joe, give it to Stuart. So I scratch it off. I've won a bag of popcorn. This is not bad, though. Everyone's a winner.
That's
so
$7. That's $8.
Well, exactly.
You know?
So I go up there and to the concession stand now. I'm upstairs. And I say, medium Coke. And they say, we only have Pepsi, if that's okay. A little too sweet for my taste. Okay. I get the Pepsi. And then I look down, and there's the popcorn. And now,
That's your free popcorn.
this is my free popcorn. Now, I was furious. I will never get a Sprint product. I mean, why?
No, he's kidding. He's kidding.
Okay. But the point being,
They're just looking out for your health.
the point being, where does the research
This is the
on
healthy portion size.
You know, where's the research where this is a great idea, let's do this, and then this is it? I mean, this just infuriates the consumer. I mean, what's the execution here? So that's the answer to the question. So, yeah, I want to know the research behind it, but then when the guy gets up there, okay, how much is that going to cost me to give away a free bag of popcorn to everybody? Oh, no, let's give away a much smaller bag.
You just did a David Marans. You answered a completely different question because you had some props in your hands. Very good. How was the movie?
Great.
All right. Very good.
I think that there's I'd like to follow up on that in terms of a lot of the things that we see is no. I didn't mean that literally. I don't have $13 to go to the movies. I think it fascinates me the idea that you do get from what we cover. We hear a lot of things about there's a disconnect there. I think where you have all this research that people are that they're doing or that they say they're doing, and then they do all these crazy things. Another good example, I think, is sit down as a civilian some night and watch a night of television and try to keep your train of thought while you're watching certain programs on certain networks or channels, given all the interruptions with all the commercials and the network promos and everything else. Now, I'm sure there's some reason why they talk about doing what they do, and then I think in some cases they go and do whatever they feel like, because I've seen there are now networks and channels on TV where there's like a 10-minute break between the programming, and then there's 10 minutes of commercials and other non-programming material before they actually go back to the program that the viewer, the consumer, is actually there to watch in the first place. You can't tell me that there's any research that tells them that that's a good idea. But they're doing it anyway.
I'm ready to say, Shana, you ignorant slut, to you, which is, forget it, Saturday Night Live, long time ago. Thank you. This is the Advertising Research Foundation, by the way. Just, you know. Thank you, Stuart. Let me give you, we could do this for another hour or two, but there'll be blood on the floor.
He said he doesn't work for your industry. He
That's duly noted.
Right. If this were the Journalism Research Foundation, it would be a different story.
Invite me to that one. I have a lot to tell you. Let me give a final question. What would you have done, career alternative? What were you going to do instead? Or now, what would you do instead if you were a couple of years younger? Not that you don't love this business. What would you have done instead?
Oh, I would have become an internet tycoon.
Internet tycoon. Chuck, that one's taken.
By the way, that's an interesting thing. I don't know if you saw this morning, Mark Cuban, who is an internet tycoon, his final tweet before he went to bed last night was, I'm in bed, and I know a lot of you think this is going to be weird, he said, but I've got the trophy next to me. So that's
what did you say? Oh, internet tycoon. Stuart?
No, that's what he said. Actually, if I had my druthers, I'd probably try and be a screenwriter.
A screenwriter?
Yeah.
Not too late. Not too late.
Yeah, I would have to say writing movies or television or entertainment of some kind.
You hear that out there? Hear that out there? I would like you to all do me a favor. This was a bit risky for the three of them to come over here and be subjected to this. We're not going to take any questions because we'll be here for a few hours. But could we please thank the three panelists for going out and doing this for us? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.